All the faces are popping up now.
Wow, there's the floodgates opened here.
Cool. Hello, everyone.
Oh my goodness.
Let me turn on my
I'm
camera.
gonna give everyone a few seconds to join. Hello.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, yes. Hi.
Yes.
Cool. Gallery. Whoa. Alright, can everyone just like mute, everyone except Chris, mute their video for now? And then, okay, cool, awesome. All right, so I guess we can start. We'll slowly ease into the topics. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the first session. So I've been like doing a lot of mentorship for a long time with a lot of different people, and I figured that, you know, as I got some more popularity on Instagram and stuff, there was no way for me to respond to every single request. So I figured that I would just do like a group session once a week instead. And inside the mentorship group, whoever posts questions and votes, you know, I'll take the top 3 or 4 topics per week and go through them in detail. And then we'll save about 15, 20 minutes or however much time is left at the end for open Q&A. And at that time, feel free to unmute and turn on your video and ask your question, and I will do my best to answer. So for today, I'm going to quickly introduce my co-host or moderator, Chris, if you want to tell everyone a bit about yourself.
Yeah, no, thanks, Richard. Hey, everybody. My name is Chris Carniello. I'm also a product designer, currently just doing some freelance work. And like Richard, graduated University of Waterloo. And during the pandemic, I thought I'd give myself a technical upskilling. So went to BrainStation on the full-time program. And yeah, here we are today, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Cool. Do you want to quickly read off the topics or the questions that we'll be covering today?
Yeah, for sure. No, so the topic today specifically gravitates around interviewing questions. So we're going to go for 3 and then take it to what we have in the second half. But the first 3 questions are how to talk about one-year projects. And and I know a lot of people have brought up this question just specifically because when we get so passionate about what we do, it's kind of hard to kind of say what the other person wants to hear and actually get that strike that chord, and balancing that fine line of humility, but also articulating what you did for your projects. And Richard, I think that's a great way to start off if we can pick your brain on that.
Sure, cool. Just a quick note, some logistical stuff before we go in. We'll be covering 3 or 4 questions today, the top voted ones, followed by a in-depth resume critique from one of the people in the audience that DM'd me. And we'll open up for non-related Q&A afterwards. But if anyone has any questions during the session, feel free to type them into chat, and then Chris will ask them if they're relevant to the current question. Cool. So, sorry, briefly repeat that first question again. I lost my trail of thought.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for clarification with everyone. Yeah, man. So specifically, the topic for today is just interview questions and just kind of articulating your work.
Mm-hmm.
And one specific thing is talking about your projects. I know that when I talk to a lot of designers, they always say a challenge they have is striking that fine line of articulating their passion, but also keeping a low ego and humility.
Right.
And just through your experience, if you can shed any light on just really talking about your projects and a certain way that you do it and any advice that you can give.
Sure, sounds good. So the question's pretty vague and broad, so there's a lot of different components to it. So keep me on track here, but there's communicating your work online publicly to people for, you know, either freelance contracts or for general like personal branding, also to kind of get recruiters and managers to reach out to you. That's like one kind of dimension. The second dimension is in your portfolio itself, the storytelling, the case study. And the third dimension is how you actually communicate your work in an interview. And even then, it depends on the company that you're interviewing for and who your audience is. So I can go briefly into like all three or deep dive into one, which one would be most interesting for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can let that open to the chat, but maybe just kind of a general overview of one, and if we have of the three, and then if we have time, maybe a deeper dive.
Sure. So I'll focus on the portfolio for now since I think that might be the most relevant. A
Hmm.
common pitfall a lot of new designers have is, people that graduate from graduate from any generic UX bootcamp. They're taught this very, very specific process. And as a result, they lean very heavily into user research. Um, but, they kind of end up creating the same cookie cutter portfolio case study as everyone else, and it becomes very, very hard for you to stand out. So your case study should be communicating like the impact, the scope, and also like what unique skill sets and context do you bring to the table. So like very often I'll see a case study that's like a generic redesign of Yelp or Facebook or Spotify. And they do that cookie cutter portfolio process of, here is a problem statement. I did user research. Here are the personas. Here are my wireframes I sketched out. Here's my mockup, and here's my interaction flow, and here's my prototype, and these are lessons I
Hmm.
learned. So maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that was enough to get you hired, but nowadays, like, it has to be a bit different. Like, very rarely are you going to use like a standard design process for anything. It's more about knowing what exact problem you're trying to solve. What are the assumptions that you have to take into account when you make decisions, especially design decisions, and how you're going to articulate like your personal approach to problem solving. So I've talked about this at length before, but there's two ways for you to stand out as a designer. The first way is to kind of get to that pinnacle 99th percentile skill level. And one of the skills, it doesn't have to be the big three, which are interaction design, visual design, and product thinking. Maybe you're a god tier animator, you're a god tier illustrator. That's one way for you to stand out. Obviously, as a new designer, that's impossibly hard to do. So a much better way to stand out is to actually develop the right combination of skills and contexts to become uniquely qualified at solving a certain high value problem within either an industry and or domain or problem space. And your case study should be reflecting of that. So when I see a case study from a junior designer and it's like, here are 3 redesigns I did in random industries, they're all very generic, and like the goal is to just improve usability, that falls like very flat for me. A much more powerful case study would be, hey, I'm a designer especially passionate about fintech, uh, in the fintech industry, and I focus exclusively on user retention, and all my case studies are centered around user retention, and the skill sets that I've developed are centered around solving user retention problems. Then that becomes really interesting, because if I'm a hiring manager at a company that matches that profile, then you become a very, very like powerful candidate for me specifically. Um, so what that means is, like, you're not going to be the best candidate for every job, but once you figure out a niche that's like very high value to you, then you'll craft the right portfolio case studies to highlight the right skills and the right context within that industry and domain space to become like a really good candidate. And that's the best kind of approach to portfolio that I can think about. I don't know if that's like too general, but is that helpful?
I think so. I think it really does give a good overview of just kind of showcasing not just your process, but just kind of like your skill sets and showcasing what really makes you unique.
It's
Um,
Yeah,
Pardon,
sorry.
go ahead.
A lot of it's like on storytelling. You want to
Mm,
craft something called a career narrative. So even though your experience might be very scattered across a lot of different industries and projects, you need to pick and choose what parts of your portfolio and your background and your CV you want to emphasize for
mhm,
the target company or role that you're going for. For example, like, I've worked at a lot of different companies, but in my current role, which is very focused on 0 to 100 consumer growth, I talk about gamification, I talk about data, I talk about research, I talk about marketing design and funnel optimization, and I talk about all the work I've done in the consumer marketplace space. Even though I have experience with enterprise and digital transformation and branding and motion, those aren't as important for the type of role that I'm going for right now. So I kind of de-emphasize those while emphasizing the ones that do matter. And that's what really should come out in your portfolio. This is also why a lot of people will waste a lot of time creating a website for their portfolio, which is fine. But for me, that only makes sense if you're going to be like a freelancer, you're trying to attract a lot of clients. If you want to go for more of an in-house product designer role, it's better for you to actually create like a slide deck template and then just cut and paste the slides in the right order and as they become relevant um, for the type of role you're going for. So I have like one master case study that's like 130 slides, but depending on like what company or role I'm going for, I cut it down to like 30 or 40 to emphasize the skills I want to bring to the table that are uniquely valuable for that company. And in terms of like what's valuable, essentially there's only two really big dimensions for any company. It's revenue and growth. Generally, for startups and mid-sized companies, growth is more important. So you want to think about what problem space can I specialize in, and how does that relate to either of those two metrics? Whereas enterprise and more mature companies are focused on revenue. So every single problem that's worth solving has to be tied to either of those two metrics. And then for you, you just need to figure out, what kind of problem space or niche do you want to develop, and what are the right skill sets to develop. And the interesting thing about this is that you don't need to be a pro at all these skills. It's more like you want to develop all those necessary skills to the right level or the minimum level to be useful in that context. So that was a bit of a word vomit, but let me know if that makes sense. And I think there's some comments in the chat, so feel free to work those in.
Yeah, no. Thanks for that, Richard. I mean, it's really, I'm just kind of looking at the chats as we continue this conversation, but like you said originally, with just kind of get a broad overview of understanding the topics, but also specializing, and one route is being the 99th tier of really developing and honing in that one skill, whether it's interaction design or understanding the business element of design. And really, once you hone in, coming a T-shaped design, articulating it. I think that's a good segue into how to sprinkle in your specialization or what makes you unique with your niche during app critiques. And if there's anything, advice that you can bring into that, maybe even anything you like to share with regards to that.
So I think a lot of people have a misconception about what app critiques are for and why it's even a step in the interview process. Broadly speaking, an app critique is not something you can or should prepare for. In fact, like most interviewers are trained to actually change the app critique prompt if it seems like you've prepared like a response to a certain app. Generally, they ask you, or they look for an app that both of you guys have on your phone, and then they ask you to kind of critique and walk through your thinking for a particular user flow or feature. And generally, like the reason why we do this is one, to see how well you can think on the fly when you aren't able to prepare ahead of time. And two, to see like as a designer, what is your unique kind of approach to design? Like what kind of things do you value? What kind of things do you emphasize? For example, like, we don't like, we can sort of tell how good you are with like visual interaction, product thinking, and maybe a handful of other skills through your portfolio, but we don't know how hard or how much work it was for you to like create that, right? Through an app critique, like if we see that you comment a lot on the branding and the iconography, then we know that, okay, like you are more of a visual designer, or you're more, you have like more of that marketing and branding kind of perspective. If you critique a lot on the information architecture, the layout, the micro interactions, and we know you're more focused on interaction. If you talk about the product strategy, the metrics, the user goals, the business prompts, the monetization strategy, then we know that you're more geared towards product thinking. And then if you bring up things like, sound design, animation, the content and the copywriting itself, then we know you have those additional skill sets. So, those are basically what we use to determine like what your niche is. It's like another signal for us. And it tells us like, what team to place you on. Because certain teams will need a very strong interaction designer, certain teams will need a very strong visual designer. And sometimes it's like not super obvious or clear from just the portfolio itself. So does that make sense at a high level what our critiques are? I can go into more detail about how to actually do one.
Yeah, if you can go into the detail, that'd be great. I mean, we do have some time until we open Q&A and as well as any additional elements for tonight. But yeah, if you like to go in deep detail, I'm sure everyone would love to hear that.
Well, I don't know if we can do like almost a simulation right now. Do you have an iPhone?
I have an Android. I know, right? But anyway,
I
iPhone coming soon.
All right, I also have an Android, but I don't really use this. What are some of the most common apps that you use?
Instagram, I say Snapchat when I don't want to throw up from the UI, but and also let's go Gmail. I think those are
Gmail's
some
good.
three.
Um,
Yeah.
So one thing that we do is we want to avoid the apps that are too common. So Facebook, Spotify, Yelp, um, Facebook, Spotify, Yelp are the common ones that everyone just for some reason has like a prepared answer for. We usually go for one that is less common. So Gmail works. So how it works is, we both open up Gmail. So if you go to your phone and open it, we can talk about, like some high level stuff. So we probe into, what is your experience using Gmail? Like, what do you think the goals are? What metrics do you think they're optimizing for? What do you like about Gmail and what do you not like? So I don't know if you want to like do this interactive exercise with me, but I can give you feedback on your answers.
Yeah, let's do it. Totally unprompted or anything. Yeah, so specifically Gmail's purpose is to kind of be the application for your Gmail account for sending out emails. So it's making sure the user's goals of composing an email and actually as seamless as possible. So if I were to click here on the bottom right for compose, I'm able to redirect completely to composing an email. Click there, answering who I want. So if I just type in H, usually hello, I get a prompt for a bunch of emails already in my address book. So I'm going to email customer service hello@blank.com.
Just to take a step back, I think it was good. I think you jumped a bit too quickly into the details. So usually spend a couple minutes talking high level and then talk about which areas you want to analyze and maybe let the interviewer guide you. So maybe I asked too many questions up front, but who do you think Gmail is for?
Gmail is definitely for any, let's see, I'm going to keep an eye on the chat as well if anyone else wants to answer it. I just saw it pop up, but Gmail's for any user that wants to send out an email.
Okay, so what do you think differentiates Gmail's users from users of Outlook, for example?
The G Suite. So really the whole digital ecosystem of Gmail, adding it to your calendar, Drive, etc.
So talk about how like Outlook is typically more for enterprise users and Gmail's more for consumers and startups. You can maybe talk about like why that is, the difference between enterprise and consumer products. Like that would highlight or give me a signal that you have product strategy as like a perspective or a skill set. So common questions like, how do you think Gmail stacks up against its competitors? That's one example of a question. So you can talk about, the pros and cons, how they're positioned in the market. So for example, you can talk about how Outlook is more for enterprise. So they're more about like security and stuff. And there's a lot of features with like, storage, saving, etc. Whereas like Gmail is really optimized for the consumer. So they have a lot of quality of life features like auto sorted tags, auto filtering into promotions, undos, a lot of like really interesting like quality of life settings. So that kind of tells me like market positioning as a skill set. Afterwards, I might, this is just more of a conversation starter, but like, what do you like about Gmail?
Oh, is that a rhetorical question, or you want to actually dive in?
You can tell me. Yeah. What do you
Yeah,
like?
sure. I like the fact that with Gmail, it really does follow a simple design for so usability heuristics are just kind of quickly just listing it. So I know it follows a lot of the Z pattern. So if I need to compose an email, I know that's at the bottom right, where
Mhm.
it's like less likely to look at. Um, I like the fact that with Gmail, like you said, it's very consumer facing. So it really fixes into my needs as individual consumer, not as an enterprise. And it's once again, if there's any additional items for integrating with the G Suite, Gmail is able to make that almost a seamless process. But we can go into detail more. I just want to keep an eye on time.
Cool. Yeah, and then usually I'll also ask like, what do you think Gmail can improve on? And then that's the big question I use to check for, you know, what you focus on as a designer. If you talk about the branding, the colors, the typography, then I know like, are those are the things that you would pay attention to as a designer. And then
Mm-hmm.
subconsciously, I'll try and match you onto teams that would value and utilize that skill set well. Um, and then when I asked you like what features do you like, that's telling me signals on like what areas you can deep dive on.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we don't need to go into too much detail because we're running out of time, but I might ask you to go through like an obscure flow like settings or what do you want to do when you have to organize your inbox? Walk me through that experience. And
Mm-hmm.
then you know, there's no right answer for this. Like the only wrong answer is if you focus like too deeply into like a random thing and don't talk broadly enough, because then you're
Mm-hmm.
not demonstrating a wide enough skill set. And if you're giving opinions more than like here are the principles and the references of you know what's good design, what's bad design, um,
Mm-hmm.
which I can tell could be misleading because they usually ask you like what do you like about it, but you should interpret that question as like from a design perspective, what is Gmail's strengths when it comes to solving their user segments problems. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I liked how you mentioned like that Z-shaped reading pattern. That's a signal that, you know, that's a design principle that you pay attention to. Gives me some signal that you have visual design as a skill set. So that's generally how an app critique works. I
Mm-hmm.
think I underestimated like how little time an hour is. But in the comments or maybe in the group, if anyone wants like a full like 1 hour or 35-minute long in-depth app critique, interactive walkthrough, or for portfolio review or anything, we can definitely do that. But for today, let's focus on the top 3 questions at more of a high level.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Richard. I'm just gonna keeping it on the time. It's 7:23. So yeah, we got a few minutes left in terms of some high level. I'm just looking at the comments. Yeah, let's jump into another session. So in terms of during the interview, what would be some advice you give for solving the design challenge?
Cool. So again, this question's slightly vague. I don't know if they're referring to a whiteboarding challenge or a take-home design challenge. So I'll briefly talk about both.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Take-home design challenges suck. It's kind of a trap, and I think it should be abolished from the industry because your portfolio should be good enough. The only reason or the only time a design challenge is appropriate is if it's like an intern level role and then your applicants don't have a portfolio and you literally need it as signal of what they can actually do. If you do have a portfolio and you're applying for like an intermediate role and above, um, what I usually say is, you know, like I'm not comfortable like doing a take-home design challenge. Can we do a whiteboarding challenge instead? Or can you tell me what exact kind of signals or skill sets you're looking for? And I can pull up a relevant case study for you to look at in more detail. And that's like very okay to say. If they want to see how you can specifically solve for a problem within their very specific niche,
Mm-hmm.
anytime they ask you to design something that could potentially be used in their product, you should always ask for compensation. It's the right thing to do, and you should not feel guilty about it. The running rate, even for intermediate designers, should be at least $100 per hour. and they'll be like, you know what, sure, like your portfolio is really good, you pass your whiteboarding challenge, but our product is extremely technical. Can you do a take-home design challenge on how you would design this new feature, add this new feature into your interface? Then he'd be like, sure, but you have to ask for money in that case. So don't feel bad about doing it. They're kind of a trap too, because they always like, oh, like don't take more than 4 hours, but like there's always some keener spending like 2 weeks on it. So I personally really, really hate the format, but that's how to navigate around it if you're presented with that option. So very rarely should you be doing take-home design challenges anymore. So I'm assuming the question is more on whiteboarding challenge. I
Yes.
just saw a question from Gene. If they refuse to pay you, that company is probably not worth working for because they don't value design. Very, very harsh sentiment for me, so take it with a grain of salt. But I've basically turned down every single design challenge I've ever been asked to do that wasn't paid, and I haven't actually like lost a interview or lost an offer because of that. So be firm. They typically only do this for very, very junior roles as well. So once you get through that hump, you should never have to do a take-home design challenge again. So on the note of a whiteboarding challenge, a lot of people don't understand what it's for. So whiteboarding challenge isn't actually, it's to see your problem solving approach and what your process actually is, because anyone can, create a wireframe after they've done the high-five mock-up and then just create some fake personas without doing their research in their portfolio. It's very common in industry. A whiteboarding challenge is to see your actual like methodical problem solving approach, and also to see how well you work within a team and how receptive you are to feedback. So oftentimes how a whiteboarding challenge is structured is we give you a very ambiguous and open-ended problem that is reflective of how you would get these problems in industry. And we intentionally do not give you enough information to solve it because we want to see what assumptions you'll make, what questions you'll ask, and how you kind of balance the two. So a lot of the times these questions will actually be abstract and non-digital. So a very common one that I love using is how would you design a alarm clock with only one button? And that alarm clock must be able to set an alarm, snooze, and stop alarm, and also view the time. So if I gave that to you, like, what would you do? Not a rhetorical question. What would you
Not
ask?
rhetorical. Yeah, no, I definitely ask of the user, well, not user, the target user group that they're looking at. So specifically of where they're collecting their data. So to find the most common feature used on an alarm clock, whether if it's a snooze button or
Oh,
just kind of a,
hmm. Oh, sorry.
yeah. Yeah. So like I ask specific questions of the age of the demographic they're focusing on, of the users. Some users may just want, whether it's the elderly or teenagers who want to sleep in, that would dramatically determine the actual alarm clock. Also, what the physical features of the alarm clock are.
Okay.
Make
So
into an Alexa. That's pretty funny.
So I think you're getting into like your approach, which is research first, identifying the target user and identifying the primary use cases, which is like a fair approach. But what you should ask before that is actually you want to clarify the constraints and the scope of the problem. For example, a good question would be asked is like, what constitutes like an alarm clock within the context of this challenge, right? Can it be voice controlled? Can it be digital? Can it be touchscreen? What is a button? What constitutes a button? For example, like there's a lot of really interesting ones that have like dials with like multiple input modes. You want to kind of define like the outer bounds of what you can design first. So basically drawing the blocks, define the constraints. That's step one. So good questions would be like, is it analog or digital? Can there be a touchscreen? Can there be voice control? And what defines a button, right? So you see how like I intentionally didn't give you enough information because I want to see you push the boundaries and what you consider in problem solving. Because when you go into like an actual company, they're never going to be like, here's all the information, solve the problem. And yeah, I agree. It's very subjective. Every interviewer will have different answers for what those constraints are. The point is that you have to ask and verify those constraints. And we're also looking at what constraints you're paying attention to, because that shows us how you think. So generally, like the approach, you can talk about like you should do, in the whiteboarding challenge, you should do more and talk less about like, this is what I would do. Talk about like what you're going to do and how you're doing, and actually do it while you're in the session. So you can briefly talk about, like you do a lot of research, but you can't demonstrate that within the session. So I wouldn't dwell too much on it, or maybe just save that for last. It's like, oh, if I had more time, or if this was a real project, then I would do demographic research, consumer research, etc. But generally, my model for this, take it with a grain of salt because you want to apply your own kind of approach, is I start top down from high levels of abstraction to very granular levels of abstraction. So I start with the product thinking, and then the interaction design, and then the visual design. So what that translates into, like, I write out my assumptions first. Like, I would do user research, but we're in a session. So I'm assuming that the user is able-bodied, they're in North America, and they have access to like electricity, for example, and they live in a stable environment. I am also assuming that, actually, I don't know, you can list out your assumptions, and then you can get into the actual design component, which is, I start with information architecture, right? So I list out all the outputs or the results, which is snooze, set alarm, view time. I think those are the three. And I talk about all the potential inputs. So what are the inputs? So even though there's only like one button, as you ask them like the constraints of the button, usually what I say is like, there's multiple input modes. You can do a long press, you can do a hold, you can do a double tap. All of those create different types of inputs, right? So I list out all the possible inputs, and then you can talk about use cases and red routes, and like, what is the lowest interaction cost? What is the highest interaction cost of all the inputs? And then arrange it that way. You can also look into like errors, like what do you not want them to accidentally do when attempting to put in an input? So that's like the interaction, information architecture piece. And then the visual part comes last, is like, usually I'll let them do like a digital screen that's non-touch, with a very limited kind of like 8-bit rendering screen. Like, how do you communicate different states, and how do you map the states to the input? Because one of the things we also want to look for is like the system always has to give feedback to the user whenever they do an input, and they have to show the result. So how would you actually communicate that? Like, do you have like a little blinking indicator when an alarm is set? Do you have an indicator for when it's snoozed? Do you have a countdown timer for when it's snoozed? So those are all questions that you need to think about. And one thing to not stress about is like, you don't actually need to finish the whiteboarding challenge. Some of the best interviews I've had just ended up being a conversation, and the person didn't even draw anything on the whiteboard except for a few scribbles. That's perfectly fine. The goal isn't to come up with a polished solution. It's to see like, what is your approach to problem solving, and like how methodical you are, and what factors you consider. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
Yeah, it does. Definitely, it's really
it's needed. Great. I would need the touchdown thing.
I think we have some people with their mics on. If we can kindly just mute them and just stay in the chat.
Yeah, we'll Q&A at the end.
Yeah, for sure. But that is extremely helpful. Thank you, Richard. Just good overview. Yeah, I'm just kind of keeping on the time. So we're about at 7:35. If we want to segue over to the next session, a PST, 7:35. EST. What year are we in anymore?
Do maybe another 10 minutes on questions related to the first 3 topics. And I think that still leaves enough time for the resume critique and audience Q&A. If there's any kind of questions or follow-up questions, or anything you want me to elaborate on the first three topics, now's the time to drop it into chat. Or Chris, if you have any questions or follow up yourself, happy to answer them.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm just the chat's blowing up like a Christmas tree right now. So so just quick question is, what do you use for whiteboarding challenges now that it's remote? I can actually answer this one if that's okay. I mean, there is Figma, you know, a lot of live demonstrations. I know like a lot of companies that they may ask you just kind of like quickly a dribble on, but Richard, with your experience interviewing people, what is more common as a
not speaking on behalf of Facebook, but generally helping people prep for these whiteboarding challenges. Mural is really good. Mural, InVision Freehand, and Figma are all very common. And worst case, like there's people that just like sketch on a piece of paper and then hold it up to the camera. That's fine too. Honestly, like for a whiteboarding challenge, we're barely looking at what you're drawing. It's really just about your problem thinking. And the whiteboard is literally a whiteboard for you to articulate and sort through your thoughts.
No, thank you for that. Yeah, and just kind of keeping on the chat. So doesn't matter which prototyping software you use, whether it's XD, Figma, or InVision.
It doesn't matter. It's more about like your goals. Every prototyping tool has its strengths and weaknesses. Some are very high fidelity, but very slow. Some are very low fidelity, but very fast. So it depends on what you need it for. There's no right answer. I wouldn't focus on mastering a particular prototyping tool. Like I use like over 10, depending on what I need. There's certain like special cases where you might need to insert a video, or you might need to use voice prototyping, and you might have to switch to a different tool. Focus on developing like a mental model of different tools, and that way you should be able to learn a new tool really quickly. Also, just want to make sure that we're going to focus on questions within the first three topics. We'll do like non-related questions afterwards, just to keep it more organized and make video editing for me easier afterwards.
Sounds good. Thanks. So just kind of circling back into, you mentioned earlier specifically the top-down method of thinking a product level, interaction level, and a visual level. Is that a recommendation structure that one could apply, whether it's app critique and whiteboard challenge, or is there a certain line of thinking that you may have?
Again, there's no hard and fast rule on process, but generally, and take this with a grain of salt, that's my approach. I always start from a macro level and then work my way to the more granular details. Like I try and do the big rocks first before pouring in the sand per se. So like there's no point trying to iterate on like a specific layout or visual design style if you don't even know what screens you need, what features you're trying to build, and what order they're supposed to be in. So generally, like you save a lot of time if you go from macro to micro. And for me, that means like product thinking first, then interaction, and then visual. And then depending on your project, your scope, and your constraints, you might approach this a little bit differently or do them in parallel. It always depends. That's why I always advocate for the fact that you should always like expand your UX toolbox of different processes, frameworks, and tools and software, and get really good at identifying the pros and cons of each of those, so you can create a optimal kind of project plan for each new product you work on. In all my years of designing, I've literally never used the same process twice. So just
it's
on there.
We adapt, right? And that's that actually does segue over into using different processes is good, because when you're locked into one linear process, every project's different, whether it's time constraint, tools available, and just really what is needed to be done. But in terms of articulating your skills, maybe there are some designers out there who understand coding or have different levels within that their own T-shape. So specifically, when you're combining it, firstly, is it okay to combine showcasing your skills of coding and design during, and whether it's the whiteboard challenge or app critique, or would be much more recommended to focus on a linear path?
That's a great question. So couple pieces to break down there. So I truly believe that no designer starts from zero because you're always bringing valuable context from your previous role or previous like domain. Like I have one designer that I'm mentoring that's a CS student that is now trying to become a designer. And I advise him to like, go for the companies that require a lot of like engineering coding context. So he was able to get advice and build up the career narrative and the right case studies to, get interviews at like GitHub and like, um, I don't even know all the coding companies or like the coding software companies, but that's an example, right? Your context is always gonna be important. Um, sorry, I forgot the second half of your question. If
Yeah,
you
best
briefly, yeah, repeat.
best showcasing those skills and whether it's appropriate or not.
Yeah, I think you always want to. So, how you should see it is like the big three skill sets: product thinking, interaction design, and video design. That's table stakes, right? It doesn't matter how good your other skills are if you don't meet the minimum requirements for these three. So, once you feel like you've demonstrated like a deep enough proficiency in the big three skill sets, then you can spend a lot of time talking about all your other skill sets and other contexts and how they're specifically relevant to your role or that role that you're interviewing for. Don't take like a random shotgun approach where you just like list off like I've done this, 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 this. I'm good at A, B, C, D, E, because you're just going to lose your audience. Be very deliberate about what information you include and emphasize and which ones you don't, and make sure you can articulate the value of how it'll make you a better candidate for that specific role. Like I've done like a lot of like illustration and sound design, but it's very irrelevant for most jobs, so I don't bring it up. But occasionally, like this one time, I had to do a contract for like a iOS video game, and then I was like, okay, like I talked about my sound design experience once I felt like I demonstrated the big three already, because I felt that was uniquely valuable for that role. But like if I interviewed for like a FANG company, then I would not talk about sound design unless I felt like it was relevant.
No, thank you for that. Yeah, it makes sense. It's really just kind of showcasing that you can really focus on the three major skill sets as your foundation as a designer: the
Yeah.
product thinking, interaction design, and visual. And then where you stand out in terms of your unique background, that's when the opportunity is to kind of showcase that.
Yeah, I think a common misconception in the industry is that, so taking a step back, there's two types of capital markets for jobs. There's a auction market and a, oh God, I forgot the other word. It's an auction market. There's two, oh, the first market is like, it's very driven based off one specific skill set. And like everything is just based off that one skill set. So for example, athletes, chess players, musicians, actors, there's only one skill set to really master. So you put everything into it. And the second type is auction, which is more of what I was talking about. Like it's more about best fit. Like one designer might be like a lead level within one industry and one problem space, but be junior somewhere else. For example, like if you put me on an AR design team right now, I'd be like an intern, or even worse, I probably wouldn't get the job. But if you put me on a consumer growth product, I could be a lead, right? So it really depends. And a lot of people kind of take this approach of like shotgunning their design skills and shotgunning their design story narrative. They're like, hey, I'm a designer. I've done all these projects. These are all my skills. And like, in the resume, they list like 50 things. It's like, how is that relevant, right? Like that just tells me that you're spread really thin and you don't specialize in what we need. So be very deliberate about how you present your skills. And yeah, sorry, that's a bit of a ramble, but that's
No, it's great because it really does show that design's not just, I think the term is a winner take all
yes,
market.
got it. Yes, you've been paying attention.
Yeah, just taking notes once in a while when we talk. But yeah, so that's a beautiful thing about design is that it's unless you're looking for a specific person with a specific T shape, a lot of your various skill sets are needed based on the project. And so it's very rarely that this one designer is the best designer and we want this designer, because it's very hard to be the best when there's so many various different perspectives.
Yeah.
And that design can contribute as an alleyway. Yeah, so it's really that flexibility that helps us just kind of grow. But I'm keeping on the time, and I think that's a great segue of kind of articulating your skills with and how you best showcase it while showcasing you're spreading yourself too thin. So I believe would be the portion of the show that's the resume critique, if we have it available.
Yep, let me share my screen. Cool.
Oh, that's a really good question in the chat, but we can
oh
wow,
you can ask it while I figure out how to get this.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Just going back, sounds good. Going back to your point, Richard, regarding revenue and growth, just kind of a general problem space that show good balance of both factors. Can you provide another example that, or just kind of reiterate the revenue and growth of just kind of best showcasing that in a general problem space?
Okay, cool. So I actually have a recording of a session I did with a mentee going into detail about this, but very high level, what you should do is think about what you prioritize in life as a designer. Like, do you care about prestige of your company, career growth, learning growth, ability to create social impact, ability to innovate, work-life balance, money? Like, what do you actually care about? And then once you have an order, like a list of what you prioritize, think about where your dream companies are, and then once you figure out where your dream companies are, look at the commonalities. And then what you want to do is you want to, I have like a structure for this, but define a space that's common within those set of companies. So let's say e-commerce, for example, you realize that, e-commerce is the future. I want to just be a very, very good designer and specialize within an e-commerce space. And then you look across all the e-commerce companies that you want to work at. What common areas are there? So the two common ones that stand out to me are merchant experience and customer experience. So digging deeper into those two areas, what are the problems and opportunities within those spaces that are very common, and how do they relate to either revenue or growth? So an example would be how to articulate this would be like a how might we, which can't infer a specific solution. You want to say, and you want to keep it very open-ended. For example, how might we improve the checkout experience for customers? How might we reduce the amount of fraud on e-commerce platforms? How might we, I don't know, improve merchant revenue, optimize merchant revenue? How do we improve new merchant onboarding and 90-day retention? So those are all how might we's, and you notice that I haven't inferred a specific solution in that statement. Generate a list of those help might we's and look at the ones that seem the most interesting to you. Like, you have to be passionate about solving that problem for you to really succeed and build that specialization and niche. So let's say I look at, how might we improve 90-day user merchant retention as like my help might we. I break that down into hypotheses, right? Hypotheses are basically testable statements that you can validate through design and prototyping. And they need to be formatted in a if, then, because statement. So for example, for that help might we of improving merchant experience or merchant retention would be, if we reduce the onboarding process from 10 minutes to 5 minutes, then user retention will be improved because more people get through that initial setup. That's a very bad articulation, but hopefully you get the point. Generate a very long list of those hypotheses. And then under each list, you want to write down, what are the skills and contexts and knowledge and information tools I need to effectively validate this hypothesis. And then just to make sure that the hypothesis is worth solving and you're developing the skills that are actually worthy, you can tie it into a metric, a set of proxy metrics that funnel up into either into growth or into monetization. So for example, for my example, I would say I would look at user retention, session duration, daily active users, time to first sale. And I would look at those proxy measures. And those would indirectly be related to both revenue and growth because it would increase the lifetime value of each customer, and it would also decrease like churn rate, which helps or counters growth. So then I know, okay, this problem is actually worth solving, and if I become really good at solving this problem, these e-commerce companies are all going to want me. And that's how I would structure my case studies and find a niche. And you want to keep doing these like hypothesis-based case studies and use it as like a way to challenge yourself and improve your skill sets, because you'll find naturally your skill will just develop in the right way if you're focusing on the right problems. Versus, think about like one designer that does what I just said and just like gets really good at solving those hypotheses within that problem space. Over like a year, they're going to develop the right combination of skills, and that's going to be a very rare and unique combination that these e-commerce companies will value, versus some other designer that's like just redesigning a random product every single day. Like they would just develop a very scattered and wide skill set with no particular focus, and that designer might be better at applying to generic companies, but if they were both competing for the same job within like, you know, Shopify or Magento or a Little Big Cartel, for example, that first designer who's focused on actual hypothesis solving would do a lot better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It really it's a really good exercise kind of understanding, just kind of reiterating what you're saying, understanding which companies you want to focus on, then determining using that framework to polish your skills as a designer to say, okay, I'm looking for company XYZ. They're more focused on, you know, revenue. So let me just kind of tailor my skill set towards completing this goal, what they need as a designer. So thank you very much, Richard. And if we can just segue over to the resume review, that'd be great.
All right, so this is a anonymous resume that I've gotten from somebody in the audience for the critique today. One thing to kind of like talk about before we go into it is resumes are really, really not important as a designer. It's 99.9% your portfolio, and like 0.1% like your resume. Like very rarely would everyone look at it. It's only useful for you to kind of talk about like your achievement and the metrics you've moved, and to get like a very large top-down view of your experience. But nowadays, like recruiters just use LinkedIn for that. So you don't really need a resume. Like you can have one, but I wouldn't focus too much time on optimizing it. That being said, also do the critique, just to kind of give you my 2 cents. So, you know, yeah, obviously have your name up front. You have a headline. This is redundant. Every single or a lot of the portfolios I see, they have a very generic tagline saying like, hey, like I'm Richard, I'm a product designer living in Toronto, passionate about solving problems. Like that doesn't tell me anything, right? So you remember the niche I told you about? Articulate your niche here. Be like Jane Doe, product design or specializing in fintech user monetization, something like that. That's a really bad example, but hopefully you get my point. I don't know what this is. I think it's kind of like a bio or like a mission statement. I would get rid of this. This is not important at all. Anything that they would want to get from this is captured in the first interview round or the background screen. Contact info is fine, although like I'd always move it to top right. You want to facilitate that Z-shaped reading pattern as much as possible to make your resume really scannable. Make sure that you can actually click on these links. If you create it in Figma, it sometimes doesn't work. Just use a word processor. Like you don't have to create like a super fancy layout. Keep it very simple, minimal, and scannable. And make sure the links are clickable. Like it's a huge turnoff if like, you know, it's somehow like flattened text that you can't click on. Skills and interests. Okay, so this is again kind of like a legacy artifact that I don't think is super useful now. Like any skills that you do have should come out in the interview and the portfolio itself. It's not super relevant or powerful to have this here, especially because most people just write like a lot of different skills, and we can't tell if you're actually good at these, bad at these, if you're an expert versus a beginner. It's really hard to know. Some people will do like skill bars, kind of like a bar graph. Again, that's very, very bad to do. Never do that because there's no frame of reference, right? We don't know what a level 5 interaction design is by your scale. So in most cases, I don't even put a skill section. Like sometimes I'll put maybe the software if it's like very specific. But if the software you use is just like Adobe Suite, Sketch, Figma, InVision, like the classic ones, then it doesn't really matter as well. I've never seen this before. It's like a pie chart of your interests. I think it's okay to put some, some of your personality and your interests in your resume, only if like you don't have enough space, or sorry, you don't have enough content to fill up the space. For me, it's kind of a red flag that like you would waste like, almost like a quarter of your resume with this. Try and talk about other stuff that matters, like certifications. Talk about your side projects. Talk about communities that you're part of, and just like random achievements. Like there's no cookie cutter resume template that you should follow. You should really mold it based off of like what you've done and what you value, and like especially like a good thing to do with your resume is to actually communicate like what you're doing outside of your work or school to improve yourself as a designer. So you can even say something like, in 2020, I read 100 books on design, or like I go to hackathon every weekend. Like that would be better than saying, I read, watch YouTube, run, and work out, because that doesn't really tell me that much. Like if anything, the personality piece comes out during the culture fit interview and not during the actual resume screen.
Yeah, also, I question whether or not that could actually be tracked by the automated filter most recruiters throw in resumes.
Yeah. Oh, one big warning. There a couple years ago, there was this like little hack that went viral on the internet where people would copy and paste keywords or job descriptions and paste into the background of their resume and like make the font white or something. Don't do that. It actually gets you blacklisted from a lot of companies. Like not even the company you applied to, like that the automatic screening software will actually pick up your name and blacklist you if it ever goes through their thing again. So hopefully nobody's done that. If you're considering it, please don't do it. And generally, like most resumes run through a processor that converts everything to plain text. So things like images like this wouldn't really pick up. Just keep your resume simple. Like it doesn't have to be super fancy. You don't need to demonstrate your visual design skills on your resume. This is a interesting layout for, I've never seen people combine education and work before. It's usually combining work and volunteer or work inside projects. I think it's interesting because it's like a timeline of what you've done, but I don't know about the usability. I feel like it'd be better to keep education separate and then focus on work experience as a section, and also side projects as a section. Design's one of those fields, or tech in general is one of the fields where side projects hold a lot of value, almost as equal value as what you can put as like official work experience. Try and omit and remove all non-design experience. It's okay if you only have like, one piece of experience that's actual design work. Everything else can be a side project. It's totally fine, but focus on just the design. One good thing I really like about this resume is for the individual experience notes. They've quantified it. So you also want to lead every single bullet point with like a strong action verb. So analyzed, trained, researched, produced, branded, targeted, they're all verbs. So that's very well done. Contrast ratio on the date is a little bit low. I would either increase the font weight or the color or make it a little bit bigger. Again, quantify everything as much as possible. So I think she's done a good job here. Like that 10% increase in sales is good. 2 new accounts weekly, that's good. It'd be good if you can kind of set the benchmark, be like, I increase this metric from this to this, and then if you can tie it back to either growth or revenue, that'd be the most powerful way to communicate a bit of experience. But just use numbers and metrics as much as you can. And then another note is you don't have to use the exact job title in your offer letter or in your HR records. Choose the title that best represents the work that you did. So even if like you weren't officially a designer at a company, but because of your interest in design, you ended up doing a lot of design, you can call yourself like, I don't know, like a service designer or like something else. Like it doesn't have to be an exact match. But I think that's it for my advice here. I'd also get rid of this like really faint like gray background box. I would just keep it really simple. I think like you probably made this in Illustrator or something, which is like not a great software to use for resumes. Just get a template on Word or Google Docs or even in Figma and keep it very, very simple. Focus on clean typography and focus on the things that actually matter, and keep things like really clean and minimal. I keep saying this. Like, if you don't have that much experience, be more generous with white space. If you do have a lot of experience, pick and choose the ones that matter the most for your role. Yeah, does that make sense?
Great.
Chris, do you have any thoughts, ideas, feedback?
Yeah, no. Thanks, Richard. Definitely echoing to what you're saying before with education and work experience. I've actually never seen that. I think that was a very interesting decision to do. But in terms of usability, just to kind of keep the sections just separate. And most places, when you get in further in your career, most companies don't really care where you went to school. They look at your work experience. That's much more valuable. And just kind of +1 to what you said of side projects are extremely important. So even if, say, like, oh, I attend this hackathon, but we didn't win, I still put it on there if it's not already on your portfolio or just a link, just because it shows that you have done experience and actual put in the work. It doesn't have to be a full-time job. It can literally, I've gone interviews before and they brought up one side project I did X amount of years ago of at a hackathon. So it's always cool to kind of see and tell your story as a designer, and that can be any experience. So don't be afraid to share.
Cool, awesome. One more thing to add to that is for junior designer roles, one of the things we really look at is proactivity and drive. So if you can demonstrate like how passionate you are about the field and what you do beyond work and school to further your knowledge and career, that's looked upon very, very favorably. Like when I graduated University of Waterloo, I had already worked for like 2 startups. I went to hackathon every single weekend. Like I did all that stuff and I communicated that in both my resume and my interview process, which retrospectively after asking the manager, like, why did you hire me? Even though like I didn't have any experience, they're like, oh, like I just trusted that you would learn really quickly because you do all this stuff outside of like what's minimally required. Cool. So I know we're over, but if you guys want to hang around, I'm happy to answer questions for 10 or 15 minutes. I don't know if you want to skim through what's in chat, or at this point, if you guys want to unmute yourself, your video and your audio, you can just go on and ask me directly.
Just open the floodgates.
Yeah, I'm just gonna kind of answer questions in the chat as people are deciding if they want to turn their video on.
I have a couple of questions. Sorry, I just have a picture up my video, but I know it's kind of going back to the first thing you talked about, but is there any major differences to keep in mind when discussing projects within your portfolio versus in an interview setting? Like, are there any things you need to adjust for an interview setting?
Yeah, good question. So your portfolio should be like a very comprehensive view of like everything, whereas for an interview, it depends on who your audience is. Like I would change what I talk about and how I present my work depending on if it's like a PM, an engineer, another designer, or a recruiter,
Mhm.
because they all look
Okay.
at different things. Sorry, did you have a? I can elaborate. I don't know if you had a comment.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, I was just writing it down.
So for
That makes sense.
engineers, they look a lot at your design system, how you work with
Mhm.
engineers, your visual effects, how well you account for use cases and edge cases. Also, by the way, I'm recording the session. I'll post a recording to the group afterwards. So you can take notes, but you don't have to. Like you can just find it afterwards, or you can just write a timestamp down to go back to. For product managers, obviously they're looking at product thinking and how well you can articulate your design decisions. Um, Other designers, they might go a bit more technical into your craft, look at your visual design and interaction design. And then recruiters, like it's more of a holistic view, but they're looking for culture fit and your proactivity and drive. So depending on who you're interviewing with, I would kind of slightly tweak my work to emphasize certain qualities over the other. And you can even like, say this up front, like, hey, like, nice to meet you, interviewer. I'm gonna try and focus on topics I think you would find most interesting, which I think are X, Y, and Z. Let me know if that sounds good. So that's also like a very good bonus for me. Every time somebody's done that, I'm like, oh, this person actually cares, and like they're taking a UX approach to interviewing, which is kind of meta, but much appreciated.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Question?
Thanks. I had one more question. So I know you said you kind of submit a slide deck for your portfolio versus a website. Do you, because I've noticed that companies, a lot of them have a required like URL field for the portfolio. So do you save it as a web page or save it in a certain way so you can
I
input it there?
literally just like click the share button on Google Slides and share that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you don't
Okay.
need a fancy website.
Okay.
Note on the portfolio, I mentioned why slide decks are important, but one of the big advantages is on average, recruiters will spend 1 to 3 minutes on your portfolio. And if any of that time is wasted on navigation or page loading, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. But if you share a Google Slide link, it basically minimizes those two risks because
Okay, great.
there is no navigation in a Google Slide. It's just like arrow keys, right? And then there is no load time because a slide deck will always load faster than like a very complex website. So
Okay,
let's keep in
good
mind.
to know.
Yeah, and Richard, just to add to that, I'm always an advocate for having just a slide deck, like a presentation version of your portfolio site in case something happens. Just because if the internet stops working or your site's not loading and you need to find a quick alternative to showcase a project on your site, it's always handy to kind of have that presentation or that Google Slide equivalent of it. And also it can articulate that you're prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely +1 to what Richard's saying.
Yeah, if you want to be super keen to, you can even print out extra copies and give them to interviewers and then let them kind of like annotate and make notes on the physical copies as you present them. And since like most of the time, if you're going to present your work, it should be like in an interview, it should be in a slide deck. Well, not every time, but a lot of the times when people present their work through their portfolio website during an interview, I find that it's like less structured and like not detailed enough, and it's just like hard to follow because it's very text dense and it's like way too many details. Whereas like create a slide deck version, it's a lot easier and you can reuse it and like not have to do extra work.
Okay, appreciate the context and info.
No worries. Any other questions?
Awesome.
I don't know if there's like a raise hand feature or anything, but
There is. It's under the reactions. So if you just move your mouse cursor, it's the middle on the right side. There's someone typed in this. Just reading the chat really quickly.
Lawrence, go ahead.
All right. My question is that it's more personal. I'm struggling on updating my resume because I've only worked on a single company. But this company is a consulting agency, and I've worked on multiple projects, at least more than 10, but I have no idea what the metric is or what the impact of my design is, because our goal is as long as it works, it's good. So I have no idea how to articulate it.
Okay, cool. There's a couple ways you can do it. So to articulate the value or impact of your design, you can do it obviously quantitatively and qualitatively. Even if you didn't set up a proper tracking funnel and attribution at the beginning of your project, or maybe you've left the company already, you can still validate it through user research. You can use something like a Wayback Machine to generate an old version of a website, or maybe have like old designs, and then you can run like a usability test or a concept test with like a group of users, and then run it again with a second group of users for your redesign, and then quantify specific metrics and try and link them to one of the two, growth or revenue. So one of the two growth or revenue metrics at a high level. There's also like more of a data-driven way as well. You can go into Google and look at like site traffic, for example. If you redesign a landing page, and you know when it went live, if you see a spike, copy and paste that graph, put it into your portfolio, that's gold. So there's a lot of small ways you can do it. Obviously, it's gonna be really hard to find the impact of your design if you didn't like design it with that KPI in mind, which is why I recommend people always do. And always get like a really good relationship with your data scientist and or engineers, so you can bug them for stats afterwards. Even at companies I worked for, worked at like years ago, I'm still tight with some engineers and data scientists there. If I ever needed to update my portfolio, like, yo, like what was the impact on my redesign? They can tell me. Not sure that's allowed, so forget I said that, or take that with a grain of salt. But there's a lot of small things you can do. Like user research is obviously the easiest one. Like there's a lot of different like usability heuristics, for example, time spent on task, time completion rate, task failure rate, directness score, that is very, very valuable, is always highly correlated to one of those metrics. And even if they're not, intuitively, every person's gonna understand the value of improving those metrics. And all you need to do is, find like a big enough sample size and run a split test with the old design and the new design. I don't know if that answers your question, but let me know if you have a follow up.
Oh, it did. It actually gave me a lot of ideas on how to update my portfolio as well. So thank you for that.
Cool.
I think we have one more time for one more question, you think?
Yep, one more question. Whoever raises their hand next. If not, I'll try and answer questions from the chat.
Everyone's a little shy.
The whole point of this is like a private community / safe space for junior and intermediate designers to ask questions that they would not ask publicly. So like salary negotiations, how to talk about their past experiences to make them better. Now's the time to ask. Hopefully people get more comfortable over time, but I appreciate the people that did ask questions. Yeah.
There's one in the chat, Richard. Oh, go ahead.
Hi. So you mentioned at the beginning that for your portfolio, it's good to show that you specialize in something. But if you're new to UX design and you're kind of just like not specialized yet, or you don't know what you specialize in, so it does sound flat, because what can you say other than, oh, I'm a UX designer and I'm passionate about like usability and whatever?
That's a great point. So I touched on this topic earlier, but like no designer starts from zero. So I'm assuming like you're switching in from a new career or a different career. Like what did you study in school before, or like what did you work as before becoming a designer?
Marketing.
Okay, perfect. So that's actually a very, very good, that's an exceptionally good background to transfer into design from. Like I studied like biomechanics, and it was very, very hard to find transferable skills. Like for science, like I said that I understood data and research, and that was really valuable. For marketing, that's even better. You have a lot of base context for content writing, content strategy, SEO, marketing design, branding, social media, ads. depending on what type of marketer you are, maybe analytics as well. That's all so valuable in design. And depending on, like, all you need to do is like either find a problem space that can use those skills, which there are a lot of. Like if you wanted to do top of funnel design, if you wanted to do marketing design as a discipline, your skill set would be really valuable. So even if you just started, you've already specialized, or at least you can tell the story of how you specialized.
Mhm.
I know like 2 or 3 designers that came from marketing background, and they all started off as a marketing designer or a designer focused on growth. And then they were eventually able to pivot and like kind of become more of a product designer in the industry domain that they found more interesting.
Cool. Okay.
Does that answer the
Thanks.
question?
Yeah.
Like great answer.
Yeah. Thank you.
No worries. I think Sebastian also raised his hand, so feel free to ask your question as well. We can go a little bit over. It's all good.
Oh no,
I
my question was actually kind of tailored to what you just answered with
Oh.
Yara's question, so worked out.
I can do maybe one last one, and then I'm gonna go get dinner. Do you have one? Chris?
Hi, Richard. Hi,
Oh.
hello.
We got one. Sorry, go ahead.
Actually, I have the same question which had Lawrence had actually. I'm working in a services company since from 1 year, and then I have done 3-4 projects, but I don't know where to start my portfolio, or I'm just struggling between this, how to start creating my portfolio regarding this.
Yeah. So I can give you some high-level advice. So from what I can tell, you've worked at a company for a bit now, and you have 3 projects. You don't know how to start. So one is like think about like what skill sets you've developed over time and how you want to brand yourself as a designer and what niche you want to articulate. And then if you're deciding between which 3 projects to do or which ones to focus on, think about the project that drove the most value in either revenue growth or both, and frame your entire case study around that. A lot of people think they need a lot of portfolio pieces. Honestly, 1 is usually good enough if you do a good enough job, or you can split your portfolio case studies into multiple for 1 specific project. So like in your case, just like ask yourself like, what unique skills or opportunities I have while working on these 3 projects, and which ones had the most impact in terms of revenue and growth. And then just write like an outline of like the story and what you did at each step. It doesn't have to be like a happy path. Don't feel like there's like existing components you have to put into your case study. Like not every case study needs a persona. Not every case study needs, nobody should be doing like those sticky notes and the hand-drawn sketches. Like nobody can read those. It doesn't provide any value. But think about, the story of that case study of your project while you worked on it in real life, and think about what are the big design artifacts that you created, like a journey map, a prototype, like a competitive audit. Put the big kind of like artifacts in and build a story around that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. That was helpful actually.
Okay, cool, awesome. All right, so I'm cutting it off here. I would love to answer more questions, but yeah, I don't know. I hope this was helpful for you guys. I don't know if this format is useful. Thank you for everyone who stayed for the full hour. I know it's like a long time. I'm hoping to do this once a week. So hopefully next time more people will post like more questions. I'll do the top 3. Although this week in particular, I'm actually partnering with a senior product design lead at Facebook who runs a different community to do a very, very deep dive on interaction design. So I'll post the details of that for Monday, and hopefully I'll see you guys there as well. But otherwise, have a great long weekend. And don't forget to post in the group, promote this on social media, help me out here. All right, Chris, we can chat again or chat in a separate video if you need help with your interview process as well. But
Yeah, that'd be great.
yeah, thank you everyone else. Hope you guys enjoyed the session. Oh, also feedback. I would love feedback. DM me feedback, or I don't know, like post in the group or message me on LinkedIn or Instagram. I would love to learn how I could improve this. If anyone knows how to do video editing, like please help me out. I will pay you or like give you mentorship and exchange. I suck at video editing, but I ideally want to capture a lot of these talks if possible. But yeah, cool. All right, I'm going to close this now. And